you? I've got some juice out here in the car. I'm gonna go bring it back for you.
Thank you for your notes, thank you.
I think Dan and,
Yeah.
You were here last Sunday, but I didn't see you.
Nice looking place here now that it's been over.
They went on good, but they're very, you just can't hard to recover from making mistakes. So thank you very much.
You made me forget my Bible or something. Must be rushing me around, made me forget my Bible. Maybe there's one in the car or something. Yeah. Morning.
Hey,
I almost forgot my Bible this morning. Oh, in trouble now. Maybe there's one here.
yeah, somebody could.
English. Ooh, Kurt's pretty small.
Good morning. Good to see you. Good morning, good to see you.
Kurt's pretty small in this Bible.
Over 35.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm struggling with how that actually works. I'm not exactly
I
sure,
was thinking
how do you go about this?
Moving,
Yeah, because we've not done that forever.
Oh my gosh, moving is not fun.
I know that, I just don't know.
Let me get over here and hug this pretty lady. How are you doing, sweetheart? Don't you look pretty?
Will you do Tinman?
Hi, my name's Jackie Defoe.
Oh, this is Loretta and Ray.
And
Ray.
Ray. Right. It's nice to meet both of you. We're glad to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to meet you.
Where is from?
Kansas City area.
Oh.
Where are you all from?
Here.
Greer? Do you live in Greer?
No, we live in Chesney.
Chesney. How
Not
away
too
is
far
that?
from
Oh,
here.
about 35 miles.
35.
Where's that pretty woman?
Well, we're looking for a place to
I don't know if
move
you
to. We aren't
sister
familiar with.
maybe.
Hey, Bella. Hey, good morning, traveler.
Yes.
Welcome, Bella.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
I am so glad.
We found our way easily, and
Good.
I think we're about the first car in the parking lot, at least out front here.
Good, good, okay. Good to have you all here. You like you guys okay?
You know, I made a cheese dip for y'all.
I know.
Yes, I made a cheese dip.
And I said they must
We
be.
like to.
I just put it, I didn't even get it out. I had it sitting on the counter, and Hunter said,
Good food.
why didn't you serve the cheese dip?
It's a nice place here.
It is? I will.
Oh, it's so exciting when you show up.
I guess it was, I was excited for you.
My wife is in the blue.
Right, man. That's something.
That was very exciting.
Yes, yeah.
But we
We're
had
here
trouble finding.
trying to
It's good
get
that
some real estate.
That's so true.
We came down and visited in January.
Stop by.
What time is
You know, like my blanket?
It's an investment. Yeah, your blanket and a mattress shirt dress everybody needs a blanket. Good to see you. Blanket, that's right. Blanket. You were talking about Paul last week. Never been. You were talking about Paul. Yeah, and then you were talking about how he got the faith. And you saw the light, you know, on Straight Street. Yes. And then when I got out to the race, got out to the car, I started the car, hit the music button, and it came up. I see the light. It's the song that was just starting. Yeah. Who sang that song? That was a good song. I don't remember, but I remember the song. I saw the light. Mike Williams did it?
Oh, Blake. Well, that's not good if it's cold in here.
It was a song from the '60s. I saw her face. Oh, I'm a believer. Yeah, I love that song. That's I'm a believer. Yeah. My brother has going to Sunday school and learned about the end of the yeah, he sees the girl like him, and they sing that song. I saw her face, I saw the light, and then my nephew looks at my father and says, "He's a Christian."
I did.
It would make sense like that. I'm a believer. Yeah. That I am. There's somebody you wouldn't think that would sing that song, sang that song. Yeah, I just can't remember who sang it.
You wonder in the beginning if you're ever going to get to that point. Good. Who did you get?
Good morning.
Morning, how are you doing?
Good, I'm Luther Pratt.
Donnie Drake.
Good to have you here. So you claim this fellow.
Every now and then.
You're related to someone. Yeah. You know, I have to go to church with him, so I feel your pain.
He's a character.
He's a good one.
You're doing good, all right? Take it easy.
It's hard.
They're scratching over here.
Thank you, sir. Keep me straight.
I'm switching over here.
It is wonderful to have everyone here this morning on this beautiful Lord's Day. It's good to have our visitors from Missouri. We have some other visitors here and with us in the back also. We want to always thank our friends and brethren who join us online from home. We want to thank you for being with us this morning also. And we'd like to invite everyone to open their Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 4. In just a moment, I'm going to ask Brother Mark Hill to lead us in a word of prayer for our Bible study. We have been studying the book of Ecclesiastes, searching for the meaning of life. We're going to continue that study and try to finish chapter 4 this morning as we talk about the value of friendship. And we're going to talk about a little bit different type of fleeting friendship at the end of this chapter. We'll see how your take on the end of this chapter is. Before we go into our study of God's Word, let's go to God in a word of prayer.
Father Almighty, we humbly come before you this morning. We give you praise and thanks for your blessings. We thank you for this time that we can come together to open thy word and study from it. We ask that you be with us in our study, that we draw from your word and your wisdom. We use these things that we learn to apply them to our lives. We ask you, Lord, to be with Luther as he recalls the things that he has studied, and be with us as listeners. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. We're going to be reading in verse 9 in just a moment. Just a little quick background review on Ecclesiastes. Solomon, the third king of Israel, one who asked God for wisdom instead of riches, and God gave him both. He sets out on a journey, kind of like maybe explorers back at the beginning of our nation, go out to explore the West and write a journal about what they find and bring the journal back, and people read and study the journal. He writes this journal, this diary about experimenting with trying to find the meaning of life without God in the picture, and that's why he uses that phrase, life under the sun. Just life on earth. How can you find happiness in life, true happiness, true meaning in life? And he's experimented with riches, with pleasure, with building projects, with success in this world. He experimented with wine and other things. And in the end, he says, it's just vanity. And so when we look at this chapter, he's going to be talking about, again, life under the sun. He'll mention in verse 15. But he's going to talk about some things, and he's already introduced us to some things about blessings that God has given us in a lifetime that come from above the sun, that come from God. And we're looking at the value of friendship at the end of this chapter. And we talked about last week about the island of loneliness. I'll just go over these points real quickly. We talked about these last week just for review. Here's a quote. I thought it was a good quote. It said, "Loneliness and the feeling of being uncared for and unwanted are the greatest poverty." All of us in life have probably had periods that we felt isolated, we felt loneliness, and we felt the desire to have a friend come by our side. And so I think we all can understand the feelings of loneliness. The difference for the Christian is even in times of loneliness here in this lifetime, we know that God is always present, that God is always caring. And that doesn't leave us isolated, alone on the island of loneliness. We asked a question last week, what is the difference between solitude and loneliness? Y'all had a good discussion on that. Solitude is you need time alone sometimes. You need time to decompress. We go on vacations to get away from it all, to kind of recharge our battery. We need time to meditate. Even, the way we are built like human beings, those who wouldn't maybe claim a belief in God or a higher power, they see the value of solitude, of personal meditation. But loneliness is different than solitude. Solitude is an intentional being alone to re-energize ourselves. Loneliness is you don't have anyone. You don't have a friend. You don't have somebody by your side. And that tends to pull the energy out of us. And this is where we left off last week, that God has created us to be social creatures. And you see that somewhat in the book of Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, where God said of Adam, "It is not good that man should be alone." Now we know that's all leading up to the creation of Eve and the creation of the marriage covenant and the marriage relationship that God has designed and created, companionship in marriage. But think about just that statement on its surface, because it is true when he looked down upon Adam. We asked a question last week, was Adam alone in the garden? Did he have animals? Yeah. Who did he walk with in the garden while he was in the garden? He had God. So in the sense of complete loneliness, no, he did not have that. But what type of loneliness did he have? I think Barbara said it. Companionship. Okay. He didn't have someone like himself to be a companion, to be a friend. And let me ask you a question as we kind of think about the wisdom of God in this statement. When did God plan to create Eve? I mean, was it like God finished creation and made man and that was it? That's all his plan included? And then as an afterthought, God thought, oops, I forgot something. We need to go back and add something to the creation. Or was Eve an afterthought, or was Eve a forethought waiting to happen?
Forethought.
Why? Why did God let man be alone for a period of time when God already planned to create Eve?
I think it's all based on the description. I'm going to create for you a helpmeet.
Yes.
And so I think it was allowing Adam to see you're not going to be able to do all by yourself. And so I'm going to create something perfect that will be the ultimate complement.
Yes.
So my wife is listening, the ultimate complement.
And Cedric said that. You're right. We can't read the mind of God on why he waited. We don't have an answer of why God waited. What did happen by God waiting is it created the realization for the need within Adam. The need, the feeling. Adam was alone. There was perhaps a sense in his life he felt loneliness, and his companion, wife, friend, Eve, filled that void and took away the loneliness.
You also have on top of that children.
Yes.
Because children weren't going to come about until
Yes.
Adam had a mate.
Yeah. So right there's more forethought for God, that God had planned eventually for Adam and Eve to have children and to populate the earth.
Yeah, before the foundation of the world, he knew how Christ was coming.
Yes. God had a lot of forethought. And I think this is just a little forethought that we see in this statement. So we can see, and I think we all would agree, that by creation, literally the beginning and God making us, we are dependent and social creatures and beings. You have some statements in the Bible in the New Testament that are kind of sad statements of loneliness. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, Paul said, "At my defense, no one," that's a big, heavy no one, "came to stand by me." He said, "But all deserted me." I think we have a very meaningful song in our culture today, the song "Stand By Me," that just gives you a warm feeling. Paul had a very cold feeling of being alone. He said, "No one." David used the same language in Psalms 142, verse 4, and he said, "Look to the right and see, there is none who takes notice of me. No refuge remains to me. No one," same words used for Paul, "no one cares for my soul." That's a hard feeling. And so we can see the wisdom when we come down to read our Bible in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 4, beginning in verse 9. Let's read verses 9 down to verse 12. God's wisdom and God's blessings. "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. And woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? The one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken." So we see in Solomon's wisdom and Solomon's observations, he sees another blessing that God does give us under the sun, and that's going to be the blessing of friendships. And when you look at verse 9, I have on my list 4 benefits or 4 values of friendship. What does he say in verse 9 about friendship? What's the first kind of benefit that he mentions?
2 are better than 1.
2 are better than 1. So when Solomon looks out life and he sees people who had no one, he sees people that maybe were alone but needed somebody, and a friend came to their side, he saw something else different there, that 2 were better than 1. When you look at that word better, that's going to be one of the 4 better statements that he makes in this chapter. If you notice, back in verse 3, he says, "Yet better than both is he who has never existed." In verse 6, "Better is a handful of quietness." Hey, there's solitude, and we could understand that. In verse 13, he says, "Better is poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king." And these are one of the four betters that he mentions in this chapter. And it is better. Two are better than one. And so when you look at verse 9, also, why is the reason two are better than one?
It's like they can do more.
Do more. Right. So there's a value in productive labor. And there might be a better phrase than productive labor you might use. Let's just say, for, productivity for life, not just the idea of labor. Linda?
They look out for each other.
They go
They're
after
there
each
to kind
other.
of support each other.
Yes. No matter what it might be work, it might be whatever else, raising a family, going through things in life, getting something taken care of. There's a more productiveness there. There's a more helpfulness there. Think about this. Naomi needed her Ruth. As a matter of fact, Ruth was greatly praised when she came back to Naomi's people, and they saw how well Ruth took care of Naomi. Moses needed his Joshua. David needed his who? Jonathan. In the book of 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul needed his John Mark. Two are better than one. Whenever Jesus sent out the 72 disciples in Luke chapter 10 verse 1, how did he send them out?
2 by 2.
2 by 2. So Solomon observes a wisdom under the sun. That's a blessing. That when it comes to the value of friendship, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor together.
And I was going to say, you went with one side of the Paul in Timothy, but I was going for Paul and Timothy because I was looking at 1 Timothy 1, where he, verse 3 says, "I urge you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths." Goes on and on. But that was Paul's friendship to a young Timothy, kind of instructing him. And then if you go to 2 Timothy, he talks about how, he hoped to see him and the tears and everything. So you kind of see that companionship, that friendship, especially from an older brother to a younger brother, and that needed relationship there.
He actually calls Timothy his son of the faith. He mentored Timothy. Did Timothy, to our knowledge, have a spiritual father at home to mentor him? No, we're just told short language. His father was a Greek. That kind of says, no, he wasn't a believer. Paul filled that for Timothy. I know of a young man who's a strong Christian today, whose father was not a believer, but the gospel preacher where he lived would always take that young man out fishing, and he mentored him. Two are better than one, and life becomes more productive in many ways. What is a second benefit of friendship in verse 10? "For if they fall, one will lift up his companion, but woe to him who's alone when he falls."
Encouragement and support.
Very good. You you must have my notes. I'll tell you what. Ellsworth is on his game. Encouragement and a support system. I see the word fall there, and I know he may be talking about simply the idea of falling down. Have you ever fallen down and first thing you look over at somebody and say, "Can you help me up?" It's nice somebody there and you say, "Help me up." Is there other ways we can fall down in life?
Yeah. Go down the wrong path.
Go down the wrong path. A friend could, when you fall down the wrong path, pull you back to the right path. How else can we fall down in life? You ever just get discouraged sometimes? Yeah, you get discouraged, and maybe a good friend calls you up and knows you're down and say, "Hey, let me take you out for a coffee," and You talk and visit together, and so if you're injured or discouraged, a friend can lift you up, and a friend can encourage you. What is the next benefit? He says in verse 11. Again, if two lie down together, they'll keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? What's his point there? You know, back in these days, you didn't have air-conditioned cars to travel in. You traveled in the weather, in the raw elements, and you might think about, if it's really cold at night, two people lying next to each other can keep warm. That might be his thought there. I simply titled this "Strength in Difficulties." Strength in difficulties. You may remember the story in the early 1970s. Flight 571 was carrying a rugby team of young people, and it crashed in the Andes Mountains. And somehow there was 45 survivors, but they had to face living in the elements, freezing elements, snow and cold and wind, for I'm not sure how long it took before they were found or they were saved. But I would have to imagine that if two lie down together, they will keep warm. They will keep warm. There's a mutual benefit, a mutual helping. We see that element in friendship. So,
I would even say this could also be a warmth of security.
Yes.
Because
in many ways,
when one is maybe asleep or not cognizant of surrounding, having the warmth of having someone that is aware as well,
yes.
That's warmth of knowing like, hey, there's protection, there's security
yes.
too.
Yeah. And just when you go through life, if life can get kind of cold, just thinking about a friend can keep you warm. There can be a benefit there. And what is the last benefit he mentions in verse 12? A little bit of maybe some fighting words there. What does he mention?
Strength in numbers, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's well said. Strength in numbers. Security in our life. So if you have a foe going against you, you have a friend there to help you with that foe. Here you might think of a physical struggle, and if you're attacked and somebody's overpowering you, if you got two of you there, you and a friend, well, you're going to overpower the enemy. Would this only apply to something, a physical struggle?
No, it could be a Bible study.
Could be a Bible study. Yeah, there's strength in having two at a Bible study. Two minds are better than one. You might not think of the answer, but somebody else will. You might think of other occasions in life. I remember a young man, I won't say who he is, y'all know this young man, police officer, whenever we lived in Alabama, was overpowered by a bad guy. And this young man showed up, and he helped the police officer overpower the bad guy. So the whole idea of security in life. So I think you all have good answers for this idea of friendships and things like that. I want to kind of ask you the question, how do we develop friends? They just don't fall in our lap. How do you develop friendships? How do you grow friendships? So if two are better than one, how do you get to two? I can tell you how not to get to two. We had a family, and some of you have all heard me use this illustration before. We had a family, good people, sweet people, that had started worshiping with us, and when we were in Alabama, and but they just had in their family subculture or uniqueness about them, and their daughter carried on that uniqueness. The daughter just cannot develop friendships. So the parents, met with me and said, "Can you make the teenagers at church be a friend to our daughter?" And I already kind of knew, what was going on. And I said, I can encourage them to do that, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's not going to stick. Your daughter has to be friend material, and she has to be a friend. You can't create artificial friendships. So how do you create genuine friendships. Can you think of some things that Solomon would say in Proverbs about friendships? You know, friendship proverbs come to mind?
Well, even before we get there, I was going to say, looking at what you listed here, I think these are the qualities or characteristics that we would look for in people.
Yes, and yeah, I didn't even think about looking at it that way. If you're looking for a friend, right there is a checklist for good friendships. Ed,
You have to be open
you do.
to being
You do.
a friend.
Okay, you do. And in opening yourself up, you also can be opening yourself up for pain. You take a risk. But friendship is worth the risk than staying on the island of loneliness. Somebody had made that observation.
You want to be like-minded.
Yes, like-minded.
Like-minded, like Dan and I, we look for like-minded people when we worship with our brethren. We look for like-minded people to worship with,
Yes,
because not everybody falls into that category of like-mindedness.
right, they don't. And if you try to take those spiritually who are not like-minded, you can't, it's like those parents and that girl with the friend. You can't force like-mindedness. And how many times in the Bible does Paul tell Christians to be like-minded?
Right,
Often.
often.
Oh, that's a very good point. Like-minded. Like-minded spiritually, and also like-minded with just things under the sun and the blessings that God's given us in His lifetime. One of my favorite Bible passages in Proverbs about friendship, and this means a lot to me, is a friend loves at all times. When you have a friend like that, and you have experienced that and felt that in life, you see the wisdom of Solomon. Two are better than one. And what did he mean that a brother is born for adversity? What do you mean a brother is born for adversity? I thought all my brothers were already born in my family and with my parents. What does it mean a brother is born for adversity?
They're already predisposed
Yes,
to help you.
they are a friend. Or during an adversity, that predisposedness comes to the surface, and that person comes to your side, and I think the brother there is calling a friend like a brother, is what and I think you're right. No, I think you're right. And you know, in our human families, our human family brothers should be predisposed to help us, and both would be true.
There is a sense in which adversity draws people together.
It does.
We talked about, the value of conflict. Sometimes you don't usually think about conflict every day, but sometimes the adversity draws the two together.
It does.
Because the adversity is outside the two of them, and they are even more bound.
They are bound. And you see that a little bit spoken of in what we just read in Ecclesiastes. See if you all can finish this passage for me in Proverbs 18:24. A man who has friends must himself be what? Friendly. Friendly. By you having friendliness and having an air of friendliness and looking to make connections in life, you're going to draw people who have like-mindedness, that was mentioned earlier, and kind of like Velcro, you stick together. Well, that's what the rest of the passage says. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. No pun intended. There is, a friend who sticks closer than a brother. What does it mean in Proverbs 27, verse 6? Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. That almost sounds like you got two words mixed up in the sentence. What does it mean, faithful are the wounds of a friend? That's on Proverbs 27, verse 6. I've always liked that passage.
A friend is somebody that's going to see your faults.
Yes.
And maybe even point them out to you.
Yes.
For your betterment.
Yes.
And that hurts sometimes.
It does. And is that hurt a faithful hurt?
Yeah.
It's faithful to you. So faithful are the wounds of a friend because a friend loves you. One of the hardest things in marriage, I hear this, is when your spouse points out your fault. Because they're the closest person to you. It can be the hardest wound to swallow because it affects our pride maybe. But faithful are the wounds of a friend. And the kisses of an enemy, they're just there to hurt you. They're not there to, it's like a Judas kiss. They're not going to be good. Who is the greatest friend that's ever walked this earth? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, and we talked about this a lot in the invitation on Tuesday nights. In the book of Luke chapter 7 and verse 34 and verse 35, Jesus is saying what the audience is saying about him, which in a sense it is true. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But then Jesus says, but wisdom is justified by her children. I always like that statement. So whenever they said to Jesus, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, do you remember what the owner of Chick-fil-A said many years ago when he took criticism for his religious stands about one man, one woman for marriage for life, and the media made fun of him? He said, guilty as charged. That's exactly what I believe. Well, Jesus would say the same thing, guilty as charged. I am a friend of tax collectors and sinners. That's what he came in the world to be and to do. So, good discussion about friendship. I think it's a very warm discussion. I think it's a very wide discussion as we go through life under the sun. And look at the next better. I think we got time to really complete the last verses here. Let's read verses 13 through 16, and I want to see what title you put on this. What is being discussed here? Let's listen and read what it says. Better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who will not be admonished no more. For he comes out of prison to be king, although he was born poor in his kingdom. I saw all the living who walks under the sun, and they are with the second youth who stands in his place. There is no end of all the people over whom he was made king. Yet those who come afterwards will not rejoice in him. Surely this is vanity and grasping of wind. What is he talking about? I had to read this several times to try to mine out of it. Okay, Solomon, what's your point? Talk about friendship. Now he's shifting to a different type of friendship. What's he talking about, do you think, in this passage? You might have the right answer, and I don't want to put my answer on the screen. Let me see what answer you come up with.
I saw this as things aren't what they seem. He looks
Yes.
like a king, he doesn't act like a king.
Yes.
He doesn't look, you'd think he'd be wise, but he's not wise.
Right.
It's just out there, the people we deal with, they're not always what they seem.
Yes. And I'll put a title on that. This is my title. Popularity
Oh, that's good.
is fickle. So you have Solomon, and of course the Holy Spirit guiding Solomon too. It's just the poetic language, the illustration that is given. It's just it reads almost like a proverb, and you just go back and restudy it. Better is a poor and wise youth than an old foolish king who won't listen to anybody. Well, I can get that, but then he builds on that. Well, you know what? He comes out of prison, though he was born poor in the kingdom. Now he's the one who's king, and the other king is just, nobody knows where he's at. He's gone now. And then he says in verse 15, I saw all the living who walk under the sun. Of course, he's talking about the way of life without God on earth. Under the sun means life on earth without having God in the picture, not thinking about God or obeying God or believing God. They were the second youth who stands in his place. And then he says there's no end to all the people over whom he was made king, yet those who come after him will not rejoice in him. So the idea of popularity being fickle. There's still a very well-known actress, Anne Hathaway, a well-known actress. She was interviewed 14 years ago by Angela Jolie, and she said this in an interview in the magazine called Interview Magazine. She was asked a question, what she fears the most in life. Now her answer was that she fears loneliness. You're an actress, you've been an actress, you're in Hollywood, you're surrounded by all these friends and popularity, and you fear the most loneliness? She went on to say this: the thing that I'm most worried about is just being alone without anybody to care for, or someone who would care for me. That horrible feeling of isolation is something that I hope I never have to deal with again. Why would somebody who is a movie star and in Hollywood and have all these fans on social media and everywhere else, whatever, and all their Hollywood actresses friends, why would they fear loneliness? Because go ahead. Ed has the answer.
Because none of them meet the standard of a true friend.
I could not say it any better. You're exactly right. Popularity is fickle. And I think that's why you see the poor man replaces the king. Those who come after him forget him who replaced the king. It just goes on and on and on. And then he says in verse 16, surely all this is vanity and grasping for wind. So when you think about the idea of popularity, one thing that's really being talked about a lot today, actually somebody just wrote a book about it. I was listening to it on them talk about the book a couple of weeks ago on the radio. What are the benefits of social media? Why are you laughing?
Because you actually took it where I was going to take it with this. One of the things that you see arise in is a lot of the stories of the childhood celebrities and the traumas that they have faced, because no one is seeing the underside of not having, sometimes not even parents that are aware of what's going on,
Yes.
let alone friends. And then when you think about social media in its inception, right? Just transparently, Facebook was created as a way for young college males to evaluate the beauty of girls. And I think that's the thing is, here's a device that, was used for, in its inception, something negative, and you see that portrayal continue. Now, there's other aspects of social media that bring people closer, allow people to have connections, allow people to reach across the globe. But I think just kind of seeing the way that that's kind of transpired is something to kind of be mindful of and pay attention to.
You're right. In my lifetime, I can remember somebody announcing a cell phone. And I'm thinking, who'd ever want to walk, I was probably 16, who'd ever want to walk around with a cell phone glued to their head every day? Well, it's just, we all do that now. And then the cell phone, we even had the bag phone in the car, like who was that on Andy Griffith? Barney had. Then you went to that, you could send a text message with your little flip phone. Now you're really social mediaing. You're talking about texting now. And now we FaceTime with pictures, and we see everybody. Who didn't check Facebook this morning when you got up to see what your friends and family and people you don't even know were doing? There's a lot of benefits of social media, but this is, and you kind of touched on it, what are the dangers of social media? And this book had mentioned this. The rise of social media has increased the feelings, watch this, of exclusion and the fear of missing out. And because of time, I'm just going to paraphrase what else this report from the American Psychological Association had, not even a year ago, and what they came out with, is that from the ages of like 10 to maybe 15, the human brain is developing. And what they're finding is kids who develop, and now they're 16, 17, 18, they've missed out on developing the skills they need to get along in life, and the skills of self-control and self-contentment. What was that word we used earlier? About meditation, about meditating. And instead, everybody's lonely at 18 to 20 years old, and they're flooded every hour with hundreds of friends on social media. It has its place, but it also has its dangers they're finding psychologically for children, as they're growing.
I was gonna make a point about popularity, how important it is. People want, this is kind
Yes.
of what it points to, popularity. And we're studying in Galatians in our Bible study in Kansas City. And it's even pointed out, we're in Galatians 2, it's pointed out Peter, he was eating with the Gentiles, but it said that the Jewish, let's see, how did it say? He drew back and separated himself
Yes.
because he was afraid of the Jewish sect,
Yes.
and he wouldn't be as popular or as accepted. And as a Christian in our culture today, we're being told wrong things.
Right.
And they want us to agree with things that aren't true, spiritually.
Yes.
And, we all have choices. Are we gonna be popular? Do we wanna go along to get along, or do we wanna speak up for the truth?
Right.
And my hope is that I always wanna speak for the truth, but it gets to the point what you're making about
Yes.
social media and,
I never thought about using Peter. That is powerful. Of all people, Peter, I think it said when the brethren came from Jerusalem, the Jewish brethren, he separated himself.
yes.
And it was somewhat of a popularity thing. It was a social pressure thing. So this whole text, and we're finishing up Proverbs chapter 4, verses 13 through 16, the idea of popularity is emptiness. The word vanity, he says, surely this also is vanity and grasping of wind. And when we began this study, we understand that vanity literally means meaninglessness. It's empty. And why are kids empty today? They have nothing foundational within their life, which is God above the sun, who is not fickle, who does not change, and he will always be there. He will always be faithful. We're about out of time, so these other points here, why is a poor prisoner better than a popular king? We talked about that. Why are popularity contests not dependable? Because you might be Miss America this year, you're not going to be Miss America next year, you're not going to be Miss America in 20 years. Actually, you're going to look very different in 20 years. And it just, popularity in this world is not a way to develop friendships. God's directions are the way to develop friendships, and two are better than one with God's instructions, not simply trying to be popular. And we can say more about social media, but I think we covered it well. Any closing questions or comments about two are better than one, or the idea about being popular? Y'all been a good class this morning. Larry, you get the last word.
TikTok is a good example of
It is.
things are.
Yeah, and you can see that in the news today if we have time to talk about, kids, doing things today. And why are you doing this? I don't know. But, I saw it on TikTok. You got to follow God, and you got to look for what guides you above the sun. And so in his diary of his journey of life under the sun without God, Solomon talks about the failure of popularity. That will let you down. Your life will be empty. But friendship built upon God will fill your life. We're going to stop here. Go ahead and study chapter 5 next week. We'll pick up there. We're going to break for worship. Before worship, we'll start worship in about 10 minutes. Thank you. You've been a good class.
Mm-hmm.